Hello, everybody. Hope you're well. So I'm Kate. Thank you so much for joining me. Sorry, I'm laughing because if you were on the workshop just now, you will know that I didn't press record. So I am re-recording this with none of you there. Anyway, never mind. Right, so I'm really excited to be hosting this workshop this evening. Thank you for joining me. Or if you're catching up, then also welcome. It's quite a fiddly one, so there are quite a few steps to go through. You may be absolutely fine sewing along, so if you've done quite a lot of sewing, brilliant, you can try and sew along. I'll try and take it relatively steady, but of course if you're watching the video, which you are, you can pause it, rewind it, do whatever you like, and kind of, take your time. So what we're going to be doing, because a few of you have already been to a few of my sewing workshops, I thought, right, we're going to mix it up a little bit and go a little bit more complicated. So the one that I normally make for this workshop is a zipped pouch like this. It's just kind of flat rectangle, but it's lined. But today, what we're going to do is make one which has got covers for the zip at the top. So it's much neater at the top like that. And it's also got like a flat bottom like that. So it's going to look a bit more fancy. So that's exciting. So what you need is your punched fabric or another piece of fabric, which will measure approximately 28 centimeters wide by, how long is it? By about probably 50 centimeters long. You'll need your zip. You will need your lining fabric, which is this lovely soft Egyptian cotton. You'll need your sewing machine, tape measure or a ruler, a pair of scissors, some pins or some clips. I'm using clips today. Obviously you need thread, and then you might also find useful a pencil or a fabric pen or some tailor's chalk. And you will also need for your sewing machine the zipper foot. So here are various zipper feet here. Let me talk about these first off, actually, because if you've not used a zipper foot before, this might be handy. Okay. So with a regular presser foot, which is like this here, you will see that there's a gap, there's a hole in the middle there, which is where the needle goes down through that hole in the middle. And then there's metal on either side, which is what pushes down and holds your fabric in place as you are sewing. But a zipper foot is the exact opposite, really. So instead of having a hole in the middle, it's got metal in the middle, and then it's got gaps on either side of the metal. And those gaps are where your needle goes down. So if you imagine you're sewing down the side of a zip with a regular presser foot, what would happen is that your stitching would be really far away from your zip. So it'd be all the way over here. So it's actually be quite hard as you're sewing down to catch the zip in place. If you have only got a regular presser foot, you could have a go, but you'd need to move the zip, the needle as far left as you can. So you'd need to adjust the stitch width on your sewing machine and move the needle to the left so that your stitching is as far left as it can be. But with a zipper foot, what you do is, again, you'll adjust the width of your stitch so that, and what that does, so you've got a straight stitch, but you adjust the width in order to move the needle to the left, so that you make sure, just carefully move your wheel down and make sure that the needle goes down through that little hole there. And then with a zipper foot, as you sew and you go down with your needle going up and down in that hole, you can see that your stitching will stay nice and close to your zip. So it'll be super neat, but because this foot bit of the foot, it means that you won't be able to sew over the zip. It just won't go over to the left. So they're really helpful. They sometimes look a little bit different to this one. So these are also zipper feet, this one here, but you can see it's the same principle. You've got metal in the middle and two gaps either side for the needle to go down. And then this one, I really like this one. This is kind of a halfway house, really. It's a bit like a regular presser foot, so it's still got a gap in the middle, but it's actually also got gaps either side as well. So I use this all the time on my sewing machine because it means you can just zip from one thing to another. They're really nice. So yes, whichever one is best for you, you can use. I'm just going to change the foot on my machine now to make it a zip foot. The thread that I'm using today is yellow thread, but obviously you'll probably want to use thread that coordinates with your fabric. I'm just using yellow so that you can, when I'm on the back, you can see my stitching and it will stand out nice and clearly. Okay, let's get started. So I've got the main fabric here. Okay, because I am redoing this, because I forgot to press record, I don't have any of this fabric left. So for my outer linen fabric, for you has got the flower on, I am using, actually, have I got, do you know what? I might have another piece. Hang on a minute. Oh. No, I haven't. Never mind. Right, so I'm using the yellow fabric today. So this is my outer linen fabric, but my lining fabric is the white cotton, exactly the same as yours. Okay, so your flower should be, with my fabric folded in half, about here. Let's just draw a little cross on. So that's where the flower is. I'm drawing that on because I might put something on it at a later date. Oh, I know, I'll probably Cricut it. That would be nice. So that's where your flower is. So what we want to do first of all is open the fabric up and the opposite end to where the flower is. So this end down here. So fold it over. So this end is the opposite end to where the flower is. I would like you to cut a strip of fabric off, which measures 3 centimeters deep. So let's just measure 3 centimeters. I'll draw a line and then cut that off. And then this piece of fabric is going to be used as that little tab that covers over the zip at either end and makes it really nice and neat. So there we go. Okay, so you can pop your main linen piece of fabric to one side for now. Grab your zip and your nice long 3 centimeter by about 28 centimeter long piece of linen fabric. If you've cut that linen fabric piece in half, so then you've got 2 strips, you're going to use one of those to conceal each of the 2 ends of the zip. Okay, so first of all, we'll take one of the pieces of the linen and you'll see that they're more or less the same width as the zip, which is great. So let's turn the zip over, first of all, and then line up one of those short ends with the short end of the zip. And then you can just pin it or clip it in place. Then I'm going to turn it over, and what we'll do is sew a line of stitching across here through the zip and through the fabric. Actually, I'm going to clip it here. That's probably better. But what we want to do is make sure that that line of stitching is about probably ½ centimeter inside the zip from that metal point there. So we're going to sew a line down here, all the way down there. And because it's a plastic teeth zip, it means that your machine will be absolutely fine. You can sew over that zip, no problem. If you had metal teeth zip, you wouldn't be able to do that, but with plastic teeth zip, you'll be fine. You just need to be, I would use the handle and sew manually as you go over this bit, just to make sure that the needle finds its way around those plastic teeth okay. Obviously, you need to make sure that you're one side of the metal clip there, because you can't sew through that, but you'll be absolutely fine going through there. So if we take it over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to set to straight stitch. Oops. we go. And I'm going to sew, straight stitch down there. Just go manually with the wheel when we get to the actual zip. There we go. Okay, so that's our line of stitching done. Always try and trim off the ends of the thread as you go along, just to keep everything nice and neat. So then if I turn it over again and we fold that fabric piece out, turn it back over. At the short end of the fabric, just turn it over by 1 centimetre and then fold it all the way back like that, so that it goes back to where the first line of stitching was. So you basically kind of like sandwiched all of those end bits of the zip in a nice neat tab of fabric. And then if you pin or clip that in place and then do another line of stitching just down here to hold it in place on the top as well. There we go. Oops. I'm just going to use the wheel again to make sure that I just move it along a tiny bit. There we go. Make sure that I don't come unstuck over the zip. There we go. Brilliant. Okay, so that's one tab end of the zip done. And we need to do exactly the same process on the other end. Just snip all those bits off. Brilliant. That's all done. So nice and neat. So let's take the other end of the zip. Now this time it's the same process again. It's just very slightly different in that this time it's the open end of the zip. So you'll notice that when the zip's closed, those two pieces don't meet each other. So let's just open the zip slightly and just clip those together so that they're slightly open like that. And we can, let's turn it over again, place the fabric on top and hold that in place as well with the clip or the pin. And then what we want to do is exactly the same. So a line of sewing about 0.5 centimetre in from where those metal teeth are down here. Okay, so back over to the sewing machine and we'll do that line of sewing. Whoops. Okay. Oops. I'm just going to go manually over the zip in a moment. Oh, over the zip in a minute. Okay. Right. And then, sorry, whenever I go over to my sewing machine, my camera quite often just starts kind of flying upwards. I have to try and keep my eye on it so that you can still see what I'm doing. Okay, so now trim all the ends off. Let's fold it back again, turn it over, fold that short end over by 1 centimetre again, and then fold it all the way over to meet the line of stitching. And then clip and do another line of stitching just inside that fold to hold it in place, just like we've done on that end. Brilliant. There we go. Right, okay, so that's the zip tabs done. Now we can start thinking about the main piece of fabric. But there we go, that's done with the zip tabby bit, so we could pop that to one side. Now, let's get your main piece of fabric out in front of you. Where's our flower? Here's the flower. I need something more obvious. I'll put a piece of tape on, that would be better. There we go. Let's say that's the flower there. Okay, so you've got the fabric right side facing upwards, and you've got the flower end at this end. This is the short end that's closest to the flower with the right side facing up. The flower is facing up. What you want to do is take your zip and place it, so half open the zip, have it half open, half closed, and then place it right side facing down on top of your fabric. And quite importantly, what you want to do is make sure that the tabs of the zip extend the same amount on either side. So actually, if we just quickly like turn it over, you can see that the tabs are extending by probably about 2 centimeters. Yeah, just over 2 centimeters on both sides, but that's the same amount on both sides. That's quite important. You don't want the tabs extending loads on one side and not at all on the other. So make sure that that is the case with yours as well. And then when you're happy that it's centered on your fabric, you can pin it in place. And what you need to make sure of is that the top edge of the zip is lined up with the top edge of the fabric. So the top edge of the zip lined up with the top edge of the fabric, and the right sides are facing. So the right side of the fabric is facing up and the right side of the zip is facing down. So pin all the way along. And then what we're going to do is with the zipper foot on your machine. So you want to make sure that the needle is going down on the left hand gap on your zipper foot. You're going to start sewing up here, and you're going to sew all the way down, making sure that your stitching is nice and close to those zip teeth. And then you're going to stop just before you get to that puller for the zip. So stop about here. We're going to pop the needle down, lift the presser foot up, and then move the zip to the back, so that at no point do we have to navigate around the puller for the zip. We can just sew a nice straight line all the way down. So I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and I'll show you. Okay. So what you can do actually, if you would like to, is trim off the end of the tab so that it's more or less flush with the fabric, if you'd like to. I did that a bit wonky, but hey ho. Right, so I can feel up here that that's where the teeth of the zip are. So that's where I'm going to start my sewing. Oops. Sorry, just got a loop of thread. There we go. And I'm going to keep sewing all the way down, making sure that my stitches are staying close to my teeth of my zip. Okay, we're nearly at the puller for the zip now. So needle down, presser foot up, and I'm going to move the zip pull backwards to where we've already done some sewing. If you need to pull your presser foot up higher, you can just keep lifting that lever and it will keep giving you a little bit more height if you need it. And then you can keep going, lower the presser foot and then keep sewing all the way down to the bottom. go. Okay. So now we open that up. You can see it's starting to look quite nice and neat, isn't it? But what we need to do next is attach the lining. So turn it back exactly how it was just now, so that you've got your fabric facing up and your zip facing down along the top. Let's trim the other end of the tab actually, so it's more or less the same width as the fabric. Now your lining fabric should be the same size more or less as your outer fabric, as your linen fabric. If you lay it on top, you might find that it is very, very slightly narrower. That's my fault. I obviously cut it a little bit too narrow, so I'm sorry about that. You'll be fine, don't worry about it. Place it on top, but make sure it is centered. So if you've got a little bit of your linen fabric showing down either side, make sure it's the same amount on the left as it is on the right. Excuse me. And then let's just go all the way down to the bottom. See, are they the same length? These are exactly the same length. That's brilliant. If your lining fabric's a bit longer, just trim it so that it's the same length as your outer fabric. But once you're done, we're good to stitch on your lining fabric as well. So linen fabric, outer fabric facing up with your flower here, zip facing down. Take your lining fabric, and you also want to line that up along the top as well. And like I said, make sure it's centered. Oh, let's make sure as well that the zip is half open. And so pin that in place, or clip it in place. And actually for this line of sewing, you'll find it a bit easier now to sew on the other side. And that's because if you were to sew on this side, what you need to do is kind of just feel your way along and try and stitch as close to the zip teeth as you possibly can. But if you pin it and then sew down this side, you might need to reverse your pins around the other way. You can use the line of stitching that you just did as your guide and just sew again on top of that line of stitching, because you know that that line is nice and close to your zip teeth. If you put a little marker where the puller for the zip is, so I know that the blue clip is where my zip pull is, so I'm going to stop just before I get to that and then put needle down, press a foot up and move the puller to the back. But otherwise, it's exactly the same as before. Just as you sew down, make sure that your lining fabric underneath doesn't go awry, should stay in the same place. If you've made lots of these, so now whenever I'm making these, I don't stitch the outer fabric on first. I do them both at the same time with the zip, just go straight down. But at the beginning, when you're doing it first, it's much, much easier to do one and then do the lining fabric afterwards. But yeah, after you've done it a few times, by all means, just start to have a bit of a practice and a play doing both at the same time, because it's just a bit speedier. Okay, under we go. Sorry, my camera's moving. There we go. Okay, so I know that that's where my zip pull is. So I'm going to stop here, needle down, press a foot up, put my hand in between the two layers, move the zip backwards, and then we can keep sewing all the way down to the bottom. There we go. Right, so now it's going to start looking very lovely and neat. We open that up, you can see, isn't that satisfying? The zip opens and closes really nicely, and you've got the outer fabric and the lining fabric here. But what we're going to do is an additional step on this, just to make sure, so you can see on this one that I've done a nice line of top stitching either side of the zip. And that means that when you open and close the zip, the fabric stays out of the way, it opens and closes really freely, and the fabric is just much neater and everything stays in the right place. So it's handy if at this stage you have a iron. I'm going to turn my mini iron on. Let's close the zip. And the reason why you want to close the zip is it's much easier to you've got to pull the fabric, the top and the bottom fabric, away from the zip and trying to press it so that it's, it's pulled away from the zip. If you don't have an iron hand, be really careful with the plastic teeth of the zip with your iron. Don't have it too hot. You don't want to melt it. And you can finger press it if you don't have an iron handy. That's also quite effective technique, just finger pressing it now. But I'm also just going to go over it with my mini iron as well, just to be on the safe side. So literally just run it up, pulling the fabric away from the teeth of the zip. And then same on the other side. Oops. There we go. Brilliant. And then what we're going to do is a line of stitching down here, just on the fabric. Can you see the line of stitching here is just on the fabric, either side of the zip. So it's easier now if you keep the zip closed, and you can actually keep the zip closed because your presser foot's going to be a bit further away. Ordinarily, you always have the bulk of the fabric on the left of your machine, but because we've got the zipper foot on at the moment and it's set up with the needle on the left, actually I think with this project it's just a bit quicker to flip your fabric over, and then you can have your zipper foot here and you can sew down like that, just inside the fold of the fabric. So this time the bulk of the fabric is going to be on the right, which is slightly unnatural, but because it's not a huge big project, it's absolutely fine, so you don't need to worry. So starting at the top, and just try and keep your stitching like equidistant from the fold all the way down if you can. Easier than it sounds. I'm sorry, harder than it sounds sometimes. Also, just make sure you check underneath every now and then to make sure you're not catching any of your lining fabric. There we go. Okay. Trim the ends. So there we go. That's a lovely top stitched edge. One edge done. Whoop, there we are. Isn't that lovely and neat and satisfying? Oh my gosh, I love it. So now we've got to do exactly the same, but on the other side of the zip. So keep your fabric facing up with the flower here, and take the other short end of fabric, of the outer fabric at the bottom. And what you want to do is you want to fold it all the way up so that this other short edge is now in line with the other edge of the zip on the right side of the zip. So it's right sides facing, right side of fabric is facing right side of zip. Remember to half open your zip, and you want to make sure that the fabric is lined up left and right as well. So there we go. I've got that's lined up. The edge of the fabric on that side is lined up with the edge of the fabric on this side. And then you can pin it in place. Let's put blue where the puller is again. Line up the top edge of the fabric with the edge of the zip. And again, you might find it easier to flip it over, because on the back here, you can see where the zip is. So it's a bit easier. Whereas if you're sewing on this side, you'd have to feel, which is not impossible at all. You might find it easier to feel where the teeth of the zip are, but it's probably easier at the beginning if you just do it this side, because you can see where the teeth of the zip are on the reverse. So back over to the machine. And stop it, silly thing. There we go. Okay, there's my puller. So needle down, press a foot up. Let's wiggle around in here, find the zip, move it back, and then we can keep sewing in a nice straight line all the way down to the bottom. Okay. So there we go. Should look like this. If you have it, place it this side facing up. So your zip now is, so you've got lining facing you and the zip is along the top, but the zip is wrong side facing up at the moment. That's how you want it to be right now for this next step. So this time, take the bottom flappy bit of the lining fabric and fold that up so that the short raw edge of the lining fabric lines up with these raw edges here, the top of the zip and the raw edge of your linen fabric. So again, just make sure that the lining fabric lines up with itself on the left and the right. Make sure that your zip is half open again. And then pin in place. Let me put that blue one where the puller is. And put another one on this time. There we go. And again, you'll probably find it easier to turn it over and sew this line of stitching along that line that you just stitched now. So use that as your guide rather than just feeling your way. But just make sure as you're stitching that you keep your eye on the lining underneath so that it doesn't start veering off to the left or anything, or the right. Okay. Right, I'm going to stop here for my puller. Needle down, press a foot up, puller to the back. Hit camera. There we go. Okay. And then finally, we need to do a line of top stitching on this side as well. So if we just turn the bag the right way out, you might think at this stage, what on earth, I've done it all wrong. This is not right, but it's absolutely fine. So turn it the right way out like this. There's our lovely flower facing upwards. And then, so this is kind of starting to look like a bag now, guys, isn't it? So we've got the zip at the top. Beautiful. This is the front, this is the back, and the lining's in the middle. It's all looking great. What we need to do is the top stitching for this bit here. So I'm going to turn my iron on again, and we need to fold it kind of like this time. So open it out sort of like that. Again, have your zip closed, because then it gives you a bit of purchase when you want to drag the fabric away from the zip, and just press it carefully like that so that it sits nice and neatly away from your zip. Oh, it's lovely. It irons so beautifully, this linen. It would be lovely as a punched design, actually. And then I'm going to turn it inside out and just make sure that the lining, because actually it's the lining really on this fabric, because it's so soft and thin, that can easily catch in the zip. So you really want to make sure that that's pressed away from the zip like that. These little Cricut mini irons are such a handy tool for sewing projects, because they get into all your little seams. They're so brilliant, and they get really hot if you want them to. They're a really good, like if you're looking for a little gift for yourself, I would say that the Easy Press Mini is a very good one. I got one for my mum because she's a really keen sewer, and she loves patchwork and quilting, and she uses it all the time. Right, so we've pressed the fabric away, and actually I find it easier to do. You might want to pop a couple of pins in here as well, just to keep that fabric away from the zip, but I find it easier to top stitch this side with it inside out like this, because it means that you're going to sew down here, you can keep the zip closed, and it means that all the fabric's on the top. If it was underneath, if you didn't have it, if you had it the right way out, not inside out, you would have all the fabric underneath and you would risk catching it in your sewing. But with it all being on top like this, there's much less chance of anything like that happening. So back over to the sewing machine, pop it on like this, and just try your best to mirror, to make it equidistant on this side from the zip as what you did on the left. Sorry, my camera keeps moving. Kind of reposition your fabric as you go down, but because it's not a huge project, it's fine, should be okay. There we go. Oops. There we go. Right, we've only got the two side seams left to do really now. Pretty far along, this is great. So let's open it out and make sure you half open your zip at this point. Importantly, that's really important now, to make sure that your zip is half open. And what you want to do is lay your bag out in front of you like this. Make sure that the lining is up at the top and the outer fabric is down here at the bottom. And then what you want to do is pinch, just get rid of that piece there. Pinch your, actually, if at this point your outer fabric is a little bit wider than your lining, you might just want to slightly trim it so that it's more in line with your lining. You don't want to trim too much off though. If it's a little bit wider, that's fine. So I'd say it can be like maybe 1/3 of a percent, like maybe, I don't know, 3 millimeters or so wider than your lining fabric on either side. And that's because this lining is such a high thread count fabric, it's not going to fray at all. You can have a really scant seam allowance on this and it will be fine. Whereas your linen fabric, it's a much looser thread count, so you need a slightly larger seam allowance. You need to make sure you're sewing further in from the edge, so you can afford for your lining to be slightly narrower than your outer linen fabric. Anyway, right, so What you want to do is at this, so there's loads of fabric here. It's actually become quite chunky and quite kind of thick and sort of stiff, really. So what you want to do is pinch it at either edge, either side, and pinch it together like that, so that the zip, so you're kind of folding that tab bit that you did perfectly in half, so that the zip is right along the top in the middle of that bit there. Go down a bit closer. So this is with it flat like that. So I'm pinching, try and keep it nice and neat, no puckers. And then the very apex of that bit up there is where the zip is. So I'm pinching it down. And then you want to clip that or pin that in place like that. And then you can keep pinning or clipping most of the way down here for the linen edge. And you could perhaps do one up here. Sorry, for the lining. What we're going to do is we're not going to start sewing at the very top of the lining up here. We're going to start sewing about 2/3 of the way down, just above this clip here. So you're going to start sewing with only, I'd say, like a 3/4 of a centimetre seam allowance. It can be quite a narrow seam allowance for this bit. And that's because you've got so much bulk here, we're actually going to trim it. And ultimately, we're going to zigzag outside of this here. So a 3/4 of a centimetre seam allowance is absolutely fine. So start stitching. You're going to start stitching here, come down. When you go across this bit here, it's very bulky. So you will want to use the wheel to sew manually to make sure that you, first of all, your needle's okay going all the way through. And secondly, you should be absolutely fine and miss that little metal bit on the zip, but you just want to make sure. And then you can keep sewing down. And if you would like your zipped pouch to be flat like this and have pointed corners like this, what you would do at that stage is you just keep sewing all the way down to the bottom. However, if you would like your pouch to have a, like, kind of, this one's not pressed, but you see, like a base like this, which is like kind of a flat base with a bit of gusset, so it's got a bit more body and depth to it, then what you do is a really, really cool little trick. It's really easy. It makes life a little bit easier if you just mark the very end, like the bottom point. So you can either do that by pressing it, or if you prefer, you can just draw a little pencil line right on that point there. And then you want to fold it up so that the bottom point there, in fact, a pencil point is probably easier because now I've pressed it in the wrong direction. So it's there, like that. You want to fold it up so that it goes up, down, up with about 1 centimetre, with that bottom bit right in the middle, like that. So can you see, if I show you the cross section of the fabric, it goes down, up, and it's about 1 centimetre's worth of fabric like that. And because we've got that point there right in the center of that fold, it means that it's going to be nice and even. You can do it a little bit more than 1 centimetre if you want, but I wouldn't do it much more, because then it will start to change the shape of the bag a little bit, and we don't want it to mess around with that too much. 1 centimetre is about right. Okay, over to the sewing machine. And we're going to start our sewing about 2/3 of the way down, just with a really quite a small seam allowance. I'm just using this presser foot as my, oh, what's going on there? There we go. Okay. So you want to be really careful when you get to this point. You might need to help your sewing machine along a little bit because it's really bulky. I'm going to stop here, lift my presser foot up just to help it up over that stepped bit. And then when I get closer, I'll start using the wheel for a couple of stitches just to make sure it's happy and to make sure that I'm not hitting that metal bit of the zip, which we've cleared. So that's all good. And then keep sewing all the way down to the bottom. There we go. Brilliant. And then you want to do exactly the same on the other side, but this time let's start. So put the linen fabric at the top and then sew all the way down. Actually, that'd be easier to go. Might be easier to go that way, actually. No, let's start with the lining. Yeah, because it's going in that direction. Put the lining fabric at the top, linen at the bottom. And again, you want to pinch here so that you're folding your zip in half and the zip bit is at the very top of that fold. Clip it or pin it in place. The clips are really good for jobs like this. They just hold things so easily compared to pins. I'm getting more used to using these, to be honest. There we go. So this time we're going to sew all the way down from the very top of the lining to the very bottom. If you want to, you can add the little fold in here as well, so that you've got the same on the lining, so it just sits in more neatly. Because this lining is so soft, it's not going to be the end of the world if you don't do that, so don't worry too much. But you if you want it to sit in really nice and neatly, you'll want to do that same fold up down with the lining as well. Make sure it's about 1 centimetre again, and then let's all the rest of those clips gone. Keep going all the way down. And again, do that little fold up here. And this time, just to make 100% sure that it's matching up, I would just hold it up against the one on the other side and make sure that it's the same measurement. Actually, this one on this side I've made a tiny bit bigger. I'll just adjust it slightly. Check it again. There we go. All good. So I'll clip that in place. There we go. And then we can sew. Need another clip down here, actually. Then we can sew all the way down this time. Okay. So same, just a scant seam allowance. You don't need to have. Don't need to have a very big seam allowance. And again, I'm going to have to help it slightly get up that step a bit more. And let's just use the wheel to make sure that we're missing out the metal bit of the zip. There we go. We're all good, I think. So I can go back with the pedal. Nice and slowly. There we are. Okay, there's 2 more lines of sewing, but they're only finishing, so you're pretty much done, everybody. What I want you to do first is at the 2 ends here, where the zips are, we need to trim that quite close. So I'd say 1/2 centimetre from your line of stitching. And what that's going to do is just means when you turn it out the right way, you'll have a much, much neater finish if you lose most of the bulk of that fabric. And then down here, the raw edge on the linen on both sides, let's do a quick zigzag stitch just close to that line of stitching so that we it doesn't start to fray, especially because we've got quite a small seam allowance. You know, if you're kind of poking around in your little zip bag, and you've got a small seam allowance, there's a chance that you might make a hole in it. But if you've got zigzag there, then there's a very, very, you know, you're strengthening it much, much better. So there's much less chance that that's going to happen. Okay, so I've just changed the foot on my machine to back to my standard presser foot. Put this under, I'm going to flip to zigzag stitch. And then zigzag just on the linen piece, in the seam allowance of the linen. You don't need to do this on the lining at all, because the lining is such a fine thread count, it's not going to fray. There we go, and then I'll do the same for the other side. And that, my friends, is it. So let's just trim off any of the other little ends of the fabric, of the threads. You might want to trim. With this one, it was a nice scant seam allowance, so I'm right up the edge of my fabric. But if you've got still a bit of the linen left, you might want to trim it slightly closer to your zigzag. But now, if you find that nice big gap that you left on the lining, and hopefully you also left the zip open so that you can reach in and turn the bag right side out through the zip and through the hole. Push it out in the corners. Look, so satisfying, such an easy way to get lovely flat bottom to the bag. There are a few ways to do little gussety things, but that's definitely the quickest way to get a nice effective result. Oh, look, there's our lovely flower. And then on these edges here, the corners of the zip, you need to really kind of push it up, and actually you can use something to help you. It's super stiff, but you can use something just to help you push that right up for a nice neat finish. You might even want to go in and trim it slightly more, but that's lovely. Trim that bit of thread. You might want to turn it back inside out again and trim it slightly more if you can't see a nice neat finish like that, but you should be okay. And then same on the other side. Look at all these bits of thread. Another bit there. And again, I'm just going to use something. I probably shouldn't use my scissors, but they're closed, so they're not too sharp, just to push that right up. Got a tiny little pucker there, but that's okay. Still looks nice and neat. And then the last job is just to press it, and it makes them, well, actually the penultimate job, the other job you need to do is to sew up this gap here. If you want it really, really super neat, you can, and remember to do a little bit of a shimmy down here at the bottom. If you want it really, really super neat, you will want to do a ladder stitch by hand with coordinating thread, just press it first like that. It's very hard to show you like that. But what I usually do is just put it flat and then do a line of fabric of machine stitching just really close to the edge with white thread, and then you can't see it, and it's going to be on the inside anyway, so you'll be okay. But yeah, you also want to give it a quick press now, because it makes all the difference when you're sewing anything. It really is the difference between something that looks really professional or not. If you press it as you go. I never usually do any ironing, hate my iron, but when I'm sewing, I love my iron, and I have it out all the time because it makes my sewing look so much neater. So I'll pull it all the way out at the edges here, press it nice and flat. And that's it. All done. Well done. If you have sewn along, I would love to see your makes. So please share them with me. You can tag me online on socials or just email me a little picture. I'd love to see, but this is quite a complicated project. So really well done. We've tackled some quite tricky steps. You've conquered zips. If you haven't done them before, well done. Yeah, goodness me. Brilliant. So what I'm going to do is, when I send you this video, I've also included a bit more of a basic learn to sew video where we make a cushion cover. So if you're making this and you're a bit like, oh god, this is a bit fiddly, I don't know what I'm doing, refer back to that cushion beginners sewing workshop video and do that one. And then you'll find coming back to this much easier, because that covers loads more of the basics first. But yeah, well done, everybody. Actually, this one. Well done, everybody. Wasn't that fun? Thank you to Jugu for the punch needle bit. And then you've done your sewing as well. So isn't that brilliant? Love it. We're planning on another one, probably for Christmas. So stay tuned. It'll be similar but different. Yeah. If you've got any other questions whatsoever, so when you're sewing, if you come unstuck, there's something that you're like, oh, I don't quite know what I'm doing here, or something's not quite right, please email me and I'll get straight back to you and help you. Yeah, and like I say, I'd love to see pictures of your makes. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope you've enjoyed it and have a lovely evening. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Lots of love. Bye-bye.